The colossal warship Dominion's wrath hovered in the upper stratosphere of Earth, its sleek obsidian hull absorbing the golden hues of the setting sun. From its command deck, Grand Admiral Lilacs, a towering being with a crown of silver-tipped tentacles and piercing violet eyes, gazed at the blue planet with casual disdain. The small green and brown marble was just another conquest, another flag to plant for the eternal dominion of Zorthax. Humanity, according to their intelligence reports, had barely mastered space travel and still relied on combustion-based weaponry. Hardly a threat, hardly a challenge. This is a formality, Lilacs muttered, hands clasped behind his back. We'll offer them a chance to surrender. If they refuse, we burn their world to cinders. His second-in-command, Commander Valrock, an amphibious brute with translucent scales, nodded solemnly. As is tradition, Grand Admiral, their choice determines their fate. A flickering hologram of High Chancellor Zorlak, supreme ruler of the Galactic Empire, materialized in front of them. His bulbous, three-eyed visage radiated boredom. Begin the standard diplomatic procedure. These backwater species often require dramatic displays of power before submission. Make it brief. Lilacs bowed slightly. Of course, Supreme One. The Admiral turned to the communications officer, a lanky, six-limbed technician tapping away at a pulsating control panel. Hail their leaders, he commanded. Let's hear their pleas. The transmission opened on Earthside. The screen shimmered, revealing a human, a woman. She sat comfortably at a polished wooden desk, sipping from a white ceramic cup emblazoned with a green mermaid. Her dark brown hair was pulled into a neat bun, and her tailored suit suggested professionalism. But it was her expression that threw Lilacs off, an infuriating blend of amusement and disinterest. I am Ambassador Linda Logan, representing the United Nations of Earth, she said, crossing one leg over the other. You are? Lilacs's tentacles flared slightly at the lack of ceremonial respect. He inhaled deeply, forcing patience. I am Grand Admiral Lilacs, of the eternal dominion of Zorthax. You will refer to me as Exalted One. Linda raised an eyebrow. Yeah, that's not happening. Lilacs's eyes narrowed. He had encountered insolence before, but never at the outset of negotiations. Very well, he continued, voice dripping with condescension. Your species has been selected for assimilation. The Dominion extends an offer of conditional servitude. Accept, and you'll be spared annihilation. Linda leaned forward, placing her cup down. So let me get this straight. You just waltz into orbit, flex your oversized ships, and expect us to roll over? She smiled. How very imperial. Hate to break it to you, Squidward, but Earth doesn't do surrender. Lilacs's jaw tightened. You misunderstand. This is not a negotiation. See, here's the thing, Linda interrupted, swirling her coffee. You seem to think Earth is some weak little ball of monkeys just waiting to be conquered. And I get it. I do. You have big ships, fancy plasma cannons, and a superiority complex the size of Jupiter. But I have a tiny feeling you didn't do your homework. Lilac sneered. Your civilization is barely 2 centuries removed from using gunpowder. What threat could you possibly? Linda held up a finger, silencing him. Did you research our wars? Our adaptability? Our, let's say, enthusiasm for violent resistance? Lilac scoffed. Your primitive conflicts are irrelevant. The Dominion has conquered thousands of worlds. Linda sighed dramatically. And yet, you've never met us before. That's the problem with empire building, isn't it? You assume every species folds the same way. Did you know we once fought a war over salt? Actual table salt. And it lasted 30 years. Lilacs exchanged glances with Valrock, who shrugged. We also had a conflict where soldiers spent years in trenches, drowning in mud and gas, just for a few feet of land, she continued. And a Cold War where we were so paranoid, we almost wiped ourselves out. Hell, we've been practicing for an alien invasion for decades, not because we knew you were coming, but because we wanted you to. Lilacs let out a guttural laugh. You expect me to believe your primitive world welcomed the idea of planetary war? More than welcomed, Linda said, tilting her head. We prepared for it. Ever heard of a little thing called science fiction? We've been imagining every possible way an alien empire could attack and coming up with countermeasures for fun. She smiled. You ever play StarCraft? Watch Independence Day? Read The Art of War? No. Well, buddy, that's on you. Lilacs bristled. This was absurd. Enough. Your illusions of grandeur will not save you. My fleet will rain fire upon your world, and when the ashes settle, your species will serve. Linda took a sip of coffee. Last chance to reconsider. Lilacs turned to his officers. Lock weapons on their major cities. Target their capital, their military bases, their energy grids. Let them witness our power. Valrock hesitated. Sir, shouldn't we? Fire. Outside Earth's orbit, the Dominion's wrath unleashed a barrage of planetary bombardment pulses, enough destructive energy to level continents. And yet, nothing happened. Lilacs blinked. Report. The weapons officer stared at the console in horror. Admiral, the systems are unresponsive. A new voice crackled over the intercom. Hey there, Space Squid, a young, cocky voice said. Name's Jared. You guys really should have updated your firewalls. Lilacs turned sharply. Who is this? Just a dude from Cleveland, Jared replied. I was trying to play some Counter-Strike when your signal interfered with my Wi-Fi. So I hacked your fleet. A pause. By the way, you're running Windows XP. What the hell, man? Lilacs roared. You expect me to believe? Also, Jared continued, I may have rerouted your power grids. Oh, and disabled your shields. And oh yeah, sent your fleet's coordinates to every nuclear-capable nation on Earth. A beat. Have fun with that. Lilacs turned to his officers. Get the systems back online. Alarms blared. Panic spread. The screens displayed incoming hypersonic projectiles, Earth's retaliation. Within moments, several Dominion warships exploded in flames, their shields non-existent, their navigation corrupted. Linda Logan, still sipping her coffee, gave Lilacs a pitying smile. Told you. Lilacs's mouth moved, but no words came. His entire life, the invincibility of the Dominion, shattered in minutes. Valrock, still frozen in shock, turned to his admiral. Sir, I think we are doomed. Before Lilacs could reply, an explosion rocked the flagship, sending crew members tumbling. Emergency sirens screeched. Linda stretched, standing up. Well, this has been fun, but I gotta run. Places to be, aliens to destroy. Enjoy the fireworks. With a final wink, she cut the transmission. Lilacs trembled with fury. Recall the fleet. We. A blinding flash erupted in the viewport as another Earth-based projectile impacted a nearby warship, sending debris spiraling into the void. Humanity had just begun, and the eternal dominion of Zorthax had no idea what was coming. The control room of the Dominion's wrath was in complete chaos. Sirens blared, crimson emergency lights bathed the command deck in eerie illumination, and a thick haze of smoke curled from overloaded consoles. Grand Admiral Lilacs clutched the edge of his command chair, his normally pristine uniform now speckled with ash and flickering sparks. The impossible was happening before his very eyes. A third explosion rocked the fleet, sending more Dominion warships spiraling out of control. One of them, the Herald of Conquest, lurched sideways, its engine suddenly failing as an Earth-based kinetic projectile. A weapon so simple, so primitive, that no Dominion war strategy had ever considered it a real threat, pierced straight through its hull like a bullet through paper. The ship shuddered, then detonated in a silent bloom of flame and wreckage, the vacuum of space swallowing its last screams. Status report. Lilacs bellowed, his voice cracking under the weight of disbelief. His second-in-command, Commander Valrock, wiped a mixture of sweat and soot from his scaled face, his gills flaring in panic. Admiral, we've lost contact with the Vanquisher, Sovereign's might, and unyielding fist. His voice trembled. They were destroyed in seconds. Lilacs gritted his teeth. That's impossible. Earth should not have this kind of weaponry. Sir, they don't, Valrock whispered. They're improvising. The very word sent a shiver down Lilacs's elongated spine. Improvisation. It was the hallmark of unpredictable, chaotic species. The Dominion thrived on control, strategy, and mathematical precision. And yet, here they were, being systematically dismantled by a civilization that still argued over pineapple on pizza. A flickering transmission burst to life on the holoscreen. "Hey, you space calamari still there?" It was the human woman again, Linda Logan, her face alight with infuriating amusement. She sat in the same office, but this time she had traded her coffee for a soda, sipping casually through a straw. "Wow, you guys are really having a rough day, huh? You know, if you'd just listened to me earlier, we could have avoided all this." Lilacs's tentacles twitched with fury. You deceitful primate. This isn't warfare, it's sabotage. What have you done?" Linda smirked. "Oh, nothing much. Just let your own arrogance do the work for us." She leaned in, voice dripping with theatrical pity. "Did you really think that just because we don't have your fancy hyperplasma death rays, we wouldn't have a few tricks up our sleeves?" Lilac slammed a fist against the console. "Explain." "All right, you asked for it," she said, holding up a single finger. 1. We jammed your long-range sensors by bouncing radio signals off your own ships. Turns out your technology is so advanced, it never even considered dealing with old-school interference. She popped a piece of gum into her mouth. "Oops." Lilacs's breath hitched. That was actually brilliant. And horrifying. Linda held up a second finger. 2. That hacker Jared? Yeah, he was real. And he actually crashed your system with Windows XP. Which is frankly your fault for having garbage-tier cybersecurity. Who the hell uses an operating system from a prehistoric era? A deep mechanical groan echoed through the ship's interior as another explosion tore through the Dominion fleet. One of the warships had accidentally opened fire on itself, its targeting systems utterly compromised. Valrock's gills fluttered. "Sir, our entire navigational network is compromised. It's as if our own systems are fighting against us." 3. Linda continued, completely ignoring the Admiral's spiraling horror. "You know those giant, unstoppable energy shields you love so much? Yeah, we figured out you can't fire out of them if they're overloaded." She gave an exaggerated wince. "So, we may have deliberately overcharged them. Now you're all just floating giant metal targets." Lilacs's stomach twisted. It was true. Several of his capital ships, still trying to launch an offensive, were trapped inside their own impenetrable defenses, unable to lower their shields without completely shutting down their main power grids. The human scum had turned their own technology against them. Linda sighed, tapping her fingers on the desk. "And finally 4, she said, grinning, "we noticed you don't really have a strategy for dealing with low-tech, high-explosive ballistic weapons. Which is weird because, turns out we've been really good at making those for centuries." She took a slow sip from her drink. "So, we just launched a bunch of and I mean a bunch." The holoscreen shuddered with static as another terrifying explosion bloomed in the distance. One of the largest Dominion dreadnoughts, a vessel easily 3 times the size of Earth's biggest aircraft carrier, suddenly broke in half, ripped apart by nothing more than a cluster of old-school missiles loaded with raw, dumb tungsten. Simple, brutal, unstoppable. Panic spread through the fleet like wildfire. "Incoming projectiles," one of the ensigns screeched, his eye stalks quivering in terror. "Shields compromised. Gravity stabilizers failing. Weapons systems offline." Lilacs felt the weight of impending catastrophe pressing down on him. This wasn't a battle anymore. This was a slaughter. And the worst part? The humans were laughing while doing it. Another blast erupted across the starboard side of the command ship, sending Valrock sprawling across the deck. Lilacs barely remained upright, his mind scrambling for an answer, any answer, to stop the disaster unfolding around him. And then, a new voice echoed through the Dominion's emergency channels. "Greetings, Imperial jackasses. This is Captain Jensen of the United States Space Force." Lilacs froze. The voice was deep, unconcerned, carrying the tone of a man who had seen far worse things than an alien invasion and wasn't even remotely impressed. "I'm gonna make this real simple," Jensen continued, cracking his knuckles audibly. "We gave y'all a chance to walk away, And instead, you came in here talking big, waving around your fancy ships like you owned the place. And now? Well, there was a pause. Now you're learning what happens when you piss off the wrong planet. Lilacs gasped as his personal security systems locked him out. A final message blinked across every Dominion screen. Goodbye, and thanks for all the fish. And then the final blow. Earth's orbital railgun, a gigantic tungsten rod dropped from a classified military station, collided with the Dominion's Wrath at hypersonic velocity. The impact alone generated an explosion so intense, so utterly catastrophic, that half the fleet disintegrated in the resulting shockwave. The last thing Lilacs saw before everything went dark was the reflection of fire and ruin in his command console. Silence. And then nothing. Linda Logan clicked her tongue, watching the incoming telemetry from her office. Well, she murmured, I did warn them. She stood, stretched, and casually strolled toward the exit, her workday finally over. Behind her, across every Dominion broadcast channel, the same message echoed across the remains of the fleet. Earth, 1, Galactic Empire, 0. The Imperial High Council chamber, nestled within the towering spires of Zorthal Prime, had never witnessed such an atmosphere of suffocating dread. The ornate hall, usually a place of regal deliberation and bureaucratic arrogance, now trembled under the weight of a disaster so unfathomable, so utterly humiliating, that even the air itself seemed heavier with impending doom. Seated at the head of the obsidian table, High Chancellor Zorlak, ruler of the Dominion, conqueror of 1,000 worlds, stared unblinking at the holographic report scrolling before him. His 3 eyes, once pools of calculating malice, flickered with something dangerously close to fear. Say it again. His voice was barely a whisper. The military adjutant, a trembling reptilian officer named General Slythar, swallowed hard. The Earth fleet has penetrated our home system's outer defenses, he managed, his ridged crest slick with anxiety. Sir, they are advancing toward the capital. Zorlak's clawed fingers dug into the armrests of his throne-like chair. No, that is not possible. He turned to his intelligence officer, Director Vlex, a wiry, four-armed being with perpetually darting eyes. Explain this treachery. Vlex's mandibles clicked rapidly, his species equivalent of nervous fidgeting. They are unlike anything we've encountered before, Supreme One. It is not merely their technology, nor their weaponry. It is their mindset. Zorlak sneered. They are primitives. Vlex shook his head quickly, antennae quivering. We believe them to be primitive. But their actions, their ruthless ingenuity, they are something else entirely. He swiped a clawed finger across the glowing console in front of him. A holographic battle map flickered into existence above the table. What should have been an overwhelming display of Dominion strength had devolved into utter chaos. The once mighty Grand Fleet, the armada that had cowed galaxies into submission, was now a scattered wreck of smoldering debris. Hundreds of Dominion warships lay in ruins, their hulking carcasses drifting through space like gravestones. And at the heart of this massacre, slicing through what remained of the Dominion's last defensive perimeter, was a horrifying sight. Earth's stolen warships, sleek, predatory, and grotesquely effective, they moved through the void with surgical precision, decimating Zorthaxian formations as if they had been designed for this very war. How did they seize our ships? Zorlak hissed, bile rising in his throat. Vlex exhaled shakily. They captured them, disabled the crews, and then they figured out how to pilot them. The entire chamber fell into stunned silence. Zorlak's upper lip curled in revulsion. That's impossible. Dominion warships are biometrically locked to our species. They should be unusable too. They shouldn't have been able to hack our defensive grid either, Vlex cut in grimly. Nor should they have been able to overload our shields, nor weaponize ancient ballistic technology that we long dismissed as obsolete. But they did, because humans are insane. His mandibles clicked again. They are terrifyingly unpredictable. Zorlak's claws flexed as he absorbed this new reality, his mind racing for a way out. Sir, General Slythar spoke up, hesitating slightly. The Earth fleet is making direct course for the Imperial Palace. Our planetary defenses are engaging, but, Zorlak snapped. The general's throat bobbed. They are laughing. He took a shuddering breath. We intercepted some of their comms chatter, and they are joking, mocking us. The room fell deathly still. The Emperor's grip on the chair tightened until his knuckles turned white. The idea that these savages, these warm-blooded little apes, could laugh in the face of the Dominion's might, it was madness. And yet, the evidence was undeniable. A new alert flashed on the holoscreen. Earth forces have breached atmosphere. The council members sat in horrified silence, watching as Earth's strike force descended upon their world like a cosmic storm. They had expected legions of well-trained Dominion warriors to repel the invaders with superior firepower. Instead, they watched in shock as humans engaged in the most absurdly reckless military maneuvers imaginable. Fighter pilots performed suicidal barrel rolls through enemy formations, using nothing but raw guts and aggressive maneuvers to dodge laser fire. Earth Marines, clad in reappropriated Dominion armor, deployed via drop pods that were literally repurposed cargo containers, crashing through palace walls like wrecking balls of doom. And worst of all, the songs. Blaring through every Dominion communication channel was an obnoxiously loud alien melody, an ancient battle hymn from humanity's most legendary warriors. The Galactic Empire was being invaded to the soundtrack of Highway to the Danger Zone. Zorlak's eye twitched violently. "What is this noise?" he roared. Linda Logan's voice crackled over the council chamber's comm system. "Oh, that," she said, the mirth in her voice practically dripping through the speakers. "That's Kenny Loggins, baby. You wouldn't understand." A massive explosion rocked the palace walls. Zorlak barely had time to register the sheer magnitude of his empire's collapse before the reinforced council chamber doors burst open. Through the smoke, striding forward with a swagger so infuriatingly confident, was Captain Jensen of the United States Space Force. His aviator sunglasses gleamed in the flickering light, even though they were inside. Behind him, a ragtag force of Earth's finest, clad in a mix of Dominion and human battle armor, advanced with a casual menace that sent shivers through the remaining council members. Jensen cracked his neck, hands resting on his hips. "So," he said, flashing an infuriatingly cocky grin. "Who's in charge here?" Zorlak, for the first time in his entire reign, had no words. Jensen gestured around at the wreckage, at the crumbling empire, at the sheer, utter annihilation of Dominion forces. "Looks like y'all are having one hell of a bad day," he mused. Zorlak's claws twitched toward his concealed weapon. Jensen sighed. "Buddy," he said, voice dropping into a low, almost pitying tone, "do not try it." Zorlak did. Or rather, he tried to. Before he could even blink, a horrific crunching sound echoed through the chamber, followed by a wet thud as Jensen slammed him through the nearest reinforced pillar. A whimpering noise escaped Zorlak's lips as he collapsed in a heap, his entire body racked with agony. Jensen crouched beside him, placing a firm hand on the Emperor's trembling shoulder. "Now," he said pleasantly, "I'm real nice compared to some of my guys. So let's make this easy." Zorlak gasped for air. Jensen leaned in, voice dropping into a lethal whisper. "You're gonna surrender, right now." Zorlak looked around, at his fallen empire, at his terrified council, at the unstoppable force of humanity that had turned the greatest galactic power in existence into a smoldering wreck in less than a week. He let out a broken, defeated breath. "I surrender." Jensen grinned. "See? That wasn't so hard." He tapped his comm. "Linda, tell the boys to stand down. We got ourselves a new territory." The throne room of the Imperial Palace of Zorthal Prime lay in ruins. Ornate pillars, once symbols of unshakable dominion, lay shattered across the floor. The banners of the Eternal Dominion, emblazoned with the insignia of conquest, were torn and smoldering. The Grand Chamber, where emperors had once decreed the fates of entire species, was now little more than a glorified prison cell. Seated in the rubble, High Chancellor Zorlak, former ruler of 1,000 worlds, sat in hunched defeat. His once proud form, adorned in imperial robes of deep violet and obsidian, was now tattered, stained with soot and the shame of absolute failure. His clawed fingers gripped the cold stone beneath him, as if trying to anchor himself to a reality he no longer controlled. Across from him, Linda Logan sipped a freshly brewed cup of coffee, perfectly at ease on a makeshift throne, a shattered piece of the Emperor's former dais. Her legs were crossed, her suit somehow still pristine despite the carnage surrounding her. She tapped her fingers against the ceramic mug, observing Zorlak with a kind of bemused patience one might reserve for a particularly slow student struggling through basic math. "So," she finally said, voice smooth but carrying the weight of undeniable finality, "this is the part where you make it official." Zorlak's throat tightened. Official. The word was foreign in his mouth now. He had never surrendered, never even considered the possibility. Linda exhaled, as if explaining something to a particularly dense intern. "You're going to announce to what's left of your government," she gestured lazily to the holographic transmission system, still partially functional despite the wreckage, "that the Dominion is over. The war is over. The Galactic Council is dissolving, effective immediately. And most importantly," she leaned forward, eyes gleaming, "you're going to tell the galaxy that Earth is in charge now." Zorlak flinched. The words felt unholy, an affront to the very fabric of existence. The humans, these barbaric, unpredictable creatures, had accomplished something that no empire, no uprising, no cosmic force had ever done. They had broken the unbreakable. A shadow fell over them as Captain Jensen stepped forward, hands on his hips, aviator sunglasses perched comfortably on his nose despite the dim lighting. He glanced around at the destruction, nodding in satisfaction. "You know," Jensen mused, "I gotta say, I expected a lot more fight out of you folks. But man, y'all folded like a cheap lawn chair." Zorlak's fists clenched. He wanted to lash out, to scream, to deny reality itself. But the evidence was everywhere. Earth had crippled their fleets, hijacked their weapons, breached their capital, and toppled an empire that had existed for millennia, all in a matter of days. And worst of all, they had enjoyed doing it. He exhaled shakily, lifting his gaze to Linda. "You humans," he whispered, voice raw with disbelief. "What are you?" Linda took another sip of her coffee, letting the silence stretch just long enough to twist the knife further. Then she shrugged. "Oh, just folks who hate being told what to do." The chamber buzzed as the transmission console flickered to life. The few surviving Dominion warlords, officials, and planetary governors appeared in the holographic display, their expressions ranging from shock to sheer terror. Zorlak swallowed the last remnants of his pride and leaned toward the console. His voice, though strained, still carried across the galaxy. "This is High Chancellor Zorlak, Supreme Ruler of the Eternal Dominion," he hesitated, throat burning as he forced the words out. "Former ruler." Gasps echoed through the transmission. "The Dominion is dissolved," he continued, his voice growing weaker with every syllable. "We have been defeated. Earth has proven itself to be a force beyond reckoning. They now dictate the new galactic order." Jensen grinned. "Damn right we do." The transmission ended. Silence settled over the ruins of the throne room. Linda exhaled. "Well," she said, stretching lazily, "that was fun." Zorlak stared at her, his chest heaving. "And what now?" Linda stood, brushing dust off her suit. Now we get to the real work." She turned to Jensen. "Deploy teams to stabilize the core systems. Make sure every ex-Imperial officer knows they work for us now, or not at all. We're going to be running things a little differently." Jensen smirked. "Ah yes, the OL benevolent conqueror routine." Linda rolled her eyes. "Let's call it strongly worded diplomatic correction." A deep rumbling sounded from outside. Through the shattered palace walls, the sky was filled with Earth's fleet, human and Dominion ships flying side by side, now repurposed under a new banner. Zorlak let out a breathless, bitter laugh. "You intend to rule us?" Linda shook her head. "Nah, we're just here to clean up your mess." Jensen cracked his knuckles. "And maybe throw in a few mandatory pizza parties." Zorlak blinked. "What?" Linda smirked. "Oh, you're gonna love Earth culture." The former ruler of the Dominion slumped, realizing the true horror of what was to come. Earth hadn't just conquered the galaxy. They were going to assimilate it, and that was infinitely worse.